Hello, welcome back. Welcome back. Let's try to continue. My cell phone keep ring. I have secret phone number. Nobody is supposed to call me if I don't have appointments. So I had to stop the camcorder. I have spare telephone number. I need a new telephone. I not remember how to use this old kind of Nokia. I have a spare telephone number, but I not really use it because this always run out of power. I forget to charge it, and I forgot. I even don't know remember how to unlock. I was using this many years, but now I not remember how to use it. SMS, and so I just have it here. I need to buy a new. I need to buy a new spare smartphone, but I don't have money for that. It costs like many hundreds of dollars, $500 or more. Because I have to pay this $1,100 I have to pay every month. So I'm not just spending $500 just for fun to buy a spare smartphone. I'll not do that. It needs to be a good one too. I'm not going to buy something cheap, Samsung $200, something not very good smartphone. I have a Sony Xperia, need to be something like this. No, if I buy a new model, new Sony Xperia, I could use my old one for this one. I don't know if I have the package there. No, I have the Sony Xperia box. I don't know where the box is. But I like this PDF. I like to read it again later. This Steam Locomotive. But it's really long and have a lot of information, a lot of numbers, and I cannot do it. I cannot remember this. I will have to read this 10 times. Even I read it 10 times, I think I will not remember all these names and numbers. But that's PDF I like to read again later in the future, because I like steam engines and steam locomotives. So I like to read about that later. And I have a read list. I have a read list with the steam locomotives. And this steam locomotive, this PDF will be a whole new read list. I can make 2 more read lists just with all this links to locomotive and railways. They mention a lot of different kinds of railways and names and persons and places. That's a whole 2 more pages with read list. So I will not do it now because I'm reading. I like to finish this Hartson. But I've not started to upload, but I have emptied the memory card. There was 6 videos, so this is part 7. So I end up charged the camcorder like 20 minutes, but there's not so much power on left. I was almost finished reading this. You got down to like there, Sweden. Down there, almost finished, but I will have to read it again. No, nobody is supposed to call my cell phone because I have a secret phone number. I will have to have a spare. I have a spare telephone number, but I'll not start to use it. As I told, I need a new smartphone. I not remember how to use this phone, and it's always it run out of power. It can keep power for like 30 days standby. This Nokia 3110, but I forget to charge it. And I not remember how to use it. You need to, when it's run out of power, you need to activate. You need to activate the phone again, the SIM card with a code and stuff. I not remember all this. I have it somewhere, but I not remember all this. I start to get old, I'm soon 60. I'm not good to all this anymore. So we have to read page by page. Yes. And I have to do something later, maybe. No, now it says resume. But let's just read page by page.
Achieved by increasing the size of grate and firebox without changes to the rest of the locomotive, requiring the addition of a second axle to the trailing truck. Freight 2-8-2S became 2-8-4S while 2-10-2S became 2-10-4S. Similarly, passenger 4-6-2s became 4-6-4S. In the United States, this led to a convergence on the dual-purpose 4-8-4 and the 4-6-6-4 articulated configuration, which was used for both freight and passenger service. 69. Mallet locomotives went through a similar transformation, evolving from bank engines into huge mainline locomotives with much larger fireboxes. Their driving wheels were also increased in size in order to allow faster running. Manufacture. Most manufactured classes. ISH 4444 0-10-0 at Warszawski Rail Terminal, St. Petersburg. The most manufactured single class of steam locomotive in the world is the 0-10-0 Russian locomotive class E steam locomotive, with around 11,000 produced both in Russia and other countries such as Czechoslovakia, Germany, Sweden, Hungary and Poland. The Russian locomotive class O numbered 9,129 locomotives, built between 1890 and 1928. Around 7,000 units were produced of the German DRB class 522-10-0 Kriegslock. In Britain, 863 of the GWR 5700 class were built, and 943 of the DX class of the London and North Western Railway, including 86 engines built for the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway. 70. United Kingdom. Great Western Railway number 6833 Calcutta Grange, a 4-6-0 Grange class steam locomotive at Bristol Temple Meads Station. Note the Belpaire, square-topped, firebox. 60163 Tornado on the East Coast Main Line in 2016. Before the 1923 Grouping Act, production in the UK was mixed. The larger railway companies built locomotives in their own workshops, with the smaller ones and industrial concerns ordering them from outside builders. A large market for outside builders existed due to the home build policy exercised by the main railway companies. An example of a pre-grouping works was the one at Melton Constable, which maintained and built some of the locomotives for the Midland and Great Northern Joint Railway. Other works included one at Boston, an early GN building, and Horwich Works. Between 1923 and 1947, the Big Four railway companies, the Great Western Railway, the London, Midland and Scottish Railway, the London and North Eastern Railway and the Southern Railway, all built most of their own locomotives, only buying locomotives from outside builders when their own works were fully occupied, or as a result of government-mandated standardization during wartime. 71. From 1948, British Railways, BR, allowed the former Big Four companies, now designated as regions, to continue to produce their own designs, but also created a range of standard locomotives which supposedly combined the best features from each region. Although a policy of dieselization was adopted in 1955, BR continued to build new steam locomotives until 1960, with the final engine being named Evening Star. 72. Some independent manufacturers produced steam locomotives for a few more years, with the last British-built industrial steam locomotive being constructed by Hunslet in 1971. Since then, a few specialized manufacturers have continued to produce small locomotives for narrow gauge and miniature railways, but as the prime market for this is the tourist and heritage railway sector, the demand for such locomotives is limited. In November 2008, a new-build mainline steam locomotive, 60,163 Tornado, was tested on UK main lines for eventual charter and tour use. Sweden. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, most Swedish steam locomotives were manufactured in Britain. Later, however, most steam locomotives were built by local factories including Nohab in Trollhättan and ASJ in Falun. One of the most successful types was the Class B, 4-6-0, inspired by the Prussian Class 8P. Many of the Swedish steam locomotives were preserved during the Cold War in case of war. During the 1990s, these steam locomotives were sold to non-profit associations abroad, which is why the Swedish Class B, Class S, 2-6-4, and Class E2, 2-8-0, locomotives can now be seen in Britain, the Netherlands, Germany and Canada. United States. California Western Railroad number 45, builder number 58045, built by Baldwin in 1924, is a 2-8-2 Mikado locomotive. It is still in use today on skunk train. Locomotives for American railroads were nearly always built in the United States with very few imports, except in the earliest days of steam engines. This was due to basic differences of markets in the United States, which initially had many small markets located large distances apart, in contrast to Europe's higher density of markets. Locomotives that were cheap and rugged and could go large distances over cheaply built and maintained tracks were required. Once the manufacture of engines was established on a wide scale, there was very little advantage to buying an engine from overseas that would have to be customized to fit the local requirements and track conditions. Improvements in engine design of both European and US origin were incorporated by manufacturers when they could be justified in a generally very conservative and slow-changing market. With the notable exception of the USR standard locomotives built during World War I, in the United States, steam locomotive manufacture was always semi-customized. Railroads ordered locomotives tailored to their specific requirements, though some basic design features were always present. Railroads developed some specific characteristics. For example, the Pennsylvania Railroad and the Great Northern Railway had a preference for the Belpaire Firebox. 73. In the United States, large-scale manufacturers constructed locomotives for nearly all rail companies, although nearly all major railroads had shops capable of heavy repairs, and some railroads, for example, the Norfolk and Western Railway and the Pennsylvania Railroad, which had two erecting shops, constructed locomotives entirely in their own shops. 74. 75. Companies manufacturing locomotives in the U.S. included Baldwin Locomotive Works, American Locomotive Company, Alco, and Lima Locomotive Works. Altogether, between 1830 and 1950, over 160,000 steam locomotives were built in the United States, with Baldwin accounting for the largest share, nearly 70,000. 76. Steam locomotives required regular and, compared to a diesel-electric engine, frequent service and overhaul, often at government-regulated intervals in Europe and the US. Alterations and upgrades regularly occurred during overhauls. New appliances were added, unsatisfactory features removed, cylinders improved or replaced. Almost any part of the locomotive, including boilers, was replaced or upgraded. When service or upgrades got too expensive, the locomotive was traded off or retired. On the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad 22-10-2 locomotives were dismantled. The boilers were placed on two new Class T4-8-2 locomotives and the residual wheel machinery made into a pair of Class U0-10-0 switches with new boilers. Union Pacific's fleet of three-cylinder 4-10-2 engines were converted into two-cylinder engines in 1942, because of high maintenance problems. Australia. The 200th steam locomotive built by Clyde Engineering, TF 1164, from Powerhouse Museum Collection in Sydney. Clyde Engineering and the Eveleigh Railway Workshops both build steam locomotives for the New South Wales Government Railways. These include the C38 Class 4-6-2. The first 5 were built at Clyde with streamlining. The other 25 locomotives were built at Eveleigh, 13, and Cardiff Workshops, 12, near Newcastle. In Queensland, steam locomotives were locally constructed by Walkers. Similarly, the South Australian Railways also manufactured steam locomotives locally at Islington Railway Workshops in Adelaide. Victorian Railways constructed most of their locomotives at its Newport workshops and in Bendigo, while in the early days locomotives were built at the Phoenix Foundry in Ballarat. Locomotives constructed at the Newport shops ranged from the NA Class 2-6-2T built for the narrow gauge, up to the H Class 4-8-4, the largest conventional locomotive ever to operate in Australia, weighing 260 tons. However, the title of largest locomotive ever used in Australia goes to the 263-ton New South Wales AD60 class locomotive 4-8-4 plus 4-8-4 Garrett, 77, built by Bayer, Peacock and Company in England. Most steam locomotives used in Western Australia were built in the United Kingdom, though some examples were designed and built locally at the Western Australian Government Railways Midland Railway Workshops. The 10-wag S-class locomotives, introduced in 1943, were the only class of steam locomotive to be wholly conceived, designed and built in Western Australia, 78. While the Midland Workshops notably participated in the Australia-wide construction program of Australian Standard Garretts, these wartime locomotives were built at Midland in Western Australia, Clyde Engineering in New South Wales, Newport in Victoria and Islington in South Australia, and saw varying degrees of service in all Australian states. 78. The end of steam in general use. The introduction of electric locomotives around the turn of the 20th century and later diesel-electric locomotives spelled the beginning of a decline in the use of steam locomotives, although it was some time before they were phased out of general use. 79. As diesel power, especially with electric transmission, became more reliable in the 1930s, it gained a foothold in North America. 80. The full transition away from steam power in North America took place during the 1950s. In continental Europe, large-scale electrification had replaced steam power by the 1970s. Steam was a familiar technology, adapted well to local facilities, and also consumed a wide variety of fuels. This led to its continued use in many countries until the end of the 20th century. Steam engines have considerably less thermal efficiency than modern diesels, requiring constant maintenance and labor to keep them operational. 81. Water is required at many points throughout a rail network, making it a major problem in desert areas, as are found in some regions of the United States, Australia and South Africa. In places where water is available, it may be hard, which can cause scale to form, composed mainly of calcium carbonate, magnesium hydroxide and calcium sulfate. Calcium and magnesium carbonates tend to be deposited as off-white solids on the inside the surfaces of pipes and heat exchangers. This precipitation is principally caused